In 1971, three young black radicals would allegedly end the life of a police officer, hide out for over 2 weeks in the New Mexico desert, hijack a commercial airliner, and then escape the United States forever. The FBI would declare these men their most wanted, but the men themselves swear they were the targets of the FBI's notorious counterintelligence program, COINTELPRO. Two of the men would die in exile, but one of them is still alive today. His name is Charlie Hill, and this is the forgotten story of one of the most dramatic escapes out of the United States in all of its history. The late 1960s were a breaking point in the United States. The Vietnam War had dragged on with no clear end in sight. Cities burned after the assassinations of Martin Luther King Jr. and Malcolm X. Police departments expanded, armed, and hardened. For many black Americans, the promise of equality had clearly become a lie. Integration no longer felt like progress. Reform no longer felt possible. And for a growing number of young radicals, the question wasn't how to fix America, but whether it was worth staying in at all. Out of this moment emerged the Republic of New Africa, a group that argued black Americans were an internal colony and that true freedom was sovereignty, not civil rights. Their goal was bold and controversial, an independent black nation carved out of the Deep South, backed by reparations for slavery and segregation. Members rejected what they saw as colonial identity. They adopted African names and imagined a country that never existed, but believed should have. It was in 1970 that Hill would officially join this movement. To the U.S. government, the Republic of New Africa was a dangerous, radical organization, and the FBI was instructed to take it down by any means necessary. On the night of November 8, 1971, just outside of Albuquerque, New Mexico, State Trooper Officer Rosenblum was patrolling the highway when he noted a 1962 Ford Galaxy driving by. Associates of Rosenblum would confirm to this very narrator that Rosenblum noted that three black men were driving the Galaxy, and that's what triggered him to pursue it. Inside the vehicle was Charlie Hill, Michael Finney, and Ralph Goodwin. Details of what would happen next still remain a mystery, but what is certain is that a gunshot rang out and Officer Rosenblum was unalived. Hill, Finney, and Goodwin fled the scene and vanished into the desert. The trio's car would soon be discovered, and inside, according to the police, were weapons, ammunition, and explosives. What followed would be referred to by the newspapers as the largest manhunt in New Mexico's history. For more than 2 weeks, the men hid in the desert, moving only at night, rationing food, drinking whatever they could find. They were hunted by helicopters, roadblocks, and armed patrols. Capture seemed inevitable, but with the death penalty on the table, the three refused to be taken alive. What Hill and company did next would be nearly impossible to pull off today, but back then, it was actually more of a common occurrence than you may think. The period would be known as the Golden Age of hijacking. From the late 1960s through the early 70s, commercial aircraft were actually hijacked at an alarming rate, sometimes several times a month in the United States. The reason was simple. There was almost no airport security. No metal detectors, no ID checks, no baggage screening. Passengers could and did board planes with firearms, and the airlines were totally cool with this. They feared that visible security, long lines, and armed guards would scare people away from flying. Security was seen as bad for business, so instead of prevention, airlines adopted compliance. Pilots and crews were trained to cooperate. The airlines would rather pay ransoms than risk deterring flyers with bothersome security. If you were desperate enough during this period, you could get away with hijacking a commercial airliner. On November 26, 1971, 18 days after the tragic traffic stop, Hill and his companions left the desert, dehydrated and desperate. They beelined directly to the airport and boarded a commercial jet. Once airborne, they took control of the plane. They forced a landing in Tampa, Florida, where they released all the passengers. Then, the aircraft diverted south, across the Florida Straits, directly to Havana, Cuba. At the time, Cuba was a common destination for American hijackers to seek refuge. Knowing Castro's feelings towards the U.S., hijackers would offer their stolen commercial aircraft as a gift for sanctuary, but almost every hijacker who attempted this was refused by Castro, who would send them home along with the aircraft. However, this time was different. Castro listened to the story Hill and his company gave him, believing that they had been a target of the FBI's COINTELPRO. Despite America's demands, Castro granted all three men sanctuary in Cuba. Then men would settle into exile, living quietly, far from the country they fled. Over the years, they would fade from public memory, and eventually both Finney and Goodwin would pass away in Cuba. But as of 2026, Hill still remains alive. And the question of whether he is a criminal or revolutionary still remains unanswered.